Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I am Mo Alethi. I'm the executive director of the new Institute of Politics and Public Service here at Georgetown. There's nothing that gets me, makes me feel better than having a sitting United States Senator lead applause for me. So thank you for that, Senator. I want to thank you all for coming here today. Part of what we are about here at the Institute is pulling back the curtain and giving you all, students, access to and a behind-the-scenes look at the people who make our political system and our government work. We're also about finding that nexus between politics and policy, politics and public service. And for those of you that watched the Pope's speech yesterday, I think it was a great entree into that conversation. That's what we're going to explore here today in this conversation about the politics of the Pope's speech and what it may mean for the next year, year and a half, and beyond. So I want to thank you all for coming. Please continue to check us out at politics.georgetown.edu for upcoming events that we're doing. I'm now going to introduce Sydney Winkler, who is a student in the college here, double majoring in government and econ from Chicago, who's very active in our work. She's actually part of Governor Fortunio's student strategy team here on campus, and she's going to introduce our panel. So, Sydney.
All right.
Let me pull this down since I'm much shorter than that. So I will first introduce IPPS and just kind of what got me inspired to be so involved. So when I first saw the announcement by Mo Alethi that the Institute of Politics and Public Service was coming to Georgetown in the fall, I could not be more excited. Not gonna lie though, I thought this was one of those things that was coming soon and would take 5 years before it was actually established. But no, IPPS, as we call it, popped up at the beginning of the semester in a small space in McGuire Hall. What makes me most excited about this opportunity though is access. Students at Georgetown always joke about the Georgetown bubble. Despite the fact that we live in DC, it's hard to take advantage of the unique opportunities in the city. The beauty of IPPS is that they bring the access to us. We are lucky to have 5 talented and experienced fellows this semester who are eager to talk to students and hear what they think about the current political state of our nation. Georgetown students cannot continue to be passive actors to the change happening in our nation's capital. If we don't like what's happening, why not change it? So that's why I'm pleased to introduce our 2 guests for today, one Republican, one Democrat, both Catholic. We welcome former Governor Luis Fortunio, SFS alum, class of 1986, back to campus. Governor Fortunio served as the 10th governor of Puerto Rico from 2009 to 2013. Under Governor Fortunio's leadership, the U.S. territory implemented major reforms, and Puerto Rico experienced economic growth for the first time in 6 years during his term. A longtime member of the Republican National Committee, he is a former chair of the Southern Governors Association, a former Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Puerto Rico, and former chair of the Congressional Hispanic Conference. He is currently a partner at Steptoe and Johnson in DC, as well as a part of our inaugural class of fellows for the Institute of Politics and Public Service. We're excited to have Governor Fortunio with us this semester. Our other guest for this conversation today is Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. Senator Kaine has served the public in a variety of ways throughout his career. The draw to serve others began early on in Senator Kaine's life, when he chose to take a year off from Harvard Law School to work with the Jesuit order in Honduras, continuing a Jesuit education that began when he attended a Jesuit high school in Kansas City. Noting it as one of his most important experiences of his life, aside from marriage and fatherhood, Senator Kaine came back from Honduras with a passion to serve others. This passion drove him to serve as a fair housing attorney for 17 years, representing those who were discriminated against based on disability or race. He also spent 6 years teaching at the University of Richmond Law School, enriching the minds of our youth in matters of law and ethics. His commitment to others is evident in Senator Kaine's public life as well. He served on the Richmond City Council, as mayor of Richmond, as lieutenant governor of Virginia, then governor of Virginia, then chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and now U.S. Senator of Virginia. Whew, okay, I'm out of breath.
I can't leave a job.
He is truly a man for others, something Georgetown men and women strive to become every day. Finally, we have the moderator for this discussion, John Carr. Mr. Carr is the founder and director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. He is also the Washington correspondent of America magazine. Carr is a longtime leader at the intersection of faith and public life in Washington. For more than 2 decades, he served as director of U.S. Catholic Bishops' Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development, providing guidance for U.S. bishops' public policy and advocacy initiatives. During the 2012 to 2013 academic year, he held a residential fellowship at the Institute of Politics at Harvard University, which we will not hold against him. In addition, Carr also served as executive director of the White House Conference on Families and director of the National Committee for Full Employment. There is no one more qualified to moderate this debate, except maybe the Pope. So finally, before we get started, I'd like to encourage everyone to pull out their phones and tweet. You thought I was going to tell you to turn them off, but do silence them. But we encourage people to tweet on social media and just talk about this discussion that we're going to have. The hashtag that we're going to use is hashtag Papal Politics, and you can also follow IPPS on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and soon Snapchat. So follow them at @GPolitics. And now I'm going to hand it off to John Carr. Take it away.
Thank you very much. I am deeply honored to be a part of this conversation with our 2 remarkable guests, and a little intimidated. You've heard all the things they've done, but you also heard I had a much more pompous title than they ever did. How would you like to be Director of Justice, Peace, and Human Development for the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Conference? It's the most pompous title in Washington. I once got on an elevator with a couple, and they had a big name tag, and I could see they were looking at it. And the guy said to his wife, "He's in charge of justice, peace, and human development." And she looked at me and said, "You need to do a better job." Well, I think what Pope Francis said yesterday to the Congress was, you need to do a better job on justice, peace, and human development. It was a stunning day. I had the privilege of being in the gallery. You're not old enough to remember this, but 55 years ago, John Kennedy was running for president. And important people, Billy Graham, Harry Truman, said he should not be president because he would take advice from the Pope. And now it seems like the only thing the Democrats and Republicans agree on is they need advice from this Pope. So it's important. And you think of the 2 people behind him, 2 Catholic kids from Ohio and Pennsylvania, Vice President Biden, John Boehner, representing 2 different parties, those high offices. And it's no surprise that John Boehner was in tears. He was not the only one. Now we know a little bit more about why he might have been particularly moved by that moment. So it was a stunning, historic opportunity. And one of the things you would hope would happen is we would step back from the partisan divide and take a moment to reflect on what the Pope had to say. I was on TV last night, and they said, do you think Democrats and Republicans would begin to talk to each other about this? And I said, if that happens, that would be Pope Francis' first miracle. Well, this is a miracle. We have 2 remarkable leaders, 2 Catholics, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican. 2 people have served in the Congress, 1 in the Senate, 1 in the House. 2 governors, 1 for the Commonwealth of Virginia, 1 for the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. 2 chairs of the Southern Governors Conference. 2 people who were mentioned for a vice president. 2 partisans, healthy partisans. 1 chair of the Democratic National Committee, 1 serves on the Republican National Committee. And both people of tremendous faith. 1 educated by the Jesuits, 1 educated by the Marist Fathers. That may be a bigger division than the Democrat and Republican divide.
Although the Jesuits too, right? So
Yeah,
they
yeah.
did as well. Yeah.
But 2 leaders who bring their faith with them into public life and have been examples of leadership and civility. So it must have been particularly moving and for the two of you to watch Pope Francis go before the Congress and both affirm American values, but also challenge us on so many issues. So let me just start, very simple question. In what ways, as you watched the Holy Father yesterday, were you most affirmed in your vocation as a public servant and most challenged in terms of your leadership in public life? And why don't we begin with you, Luis?
Sure. Well, first of all, I must say I'm honored to be here with you, and certainly honored to be here with the senator from Virginia, who is a good friend. He, in spite of the fact that I didn't have a Southern drawl, he included me in a way that was embracive in the Southern Governors Association organization, and actually, he, to a great degree, pushed me into the leadership structure, and that's how a couple of years after he was a chair, I was the chair. I would say that, and I was not, and I would love to hear what you have to say, but I was not there, but I was moved in my office as I watched some of this. I was one of the thousands of Washingtonians that stood on the street just hoping to get a glimpse of this wonderful man. And what we have to ask ourselves is why? What does he have that is so tremendous that pulls everyone in his direction? Certainly it's not money. It's power, but in a different way. He has no armies. He doesn't run for office anymore, although he was a reluctant pope, for what I hear. I would say is that he is the embodiment of what actually Jesus Christ wanted us to do with our lives. And we all know that we are so imperfect and that we strive to do better every day, but we don't. And this man, with his example, because he's not admonishing us, he didn't go to the Congress to say, you're doing this wrong. Right? He embraces people. He said, I watched his full homily, a number of them, but I started with the one he gave in Havana. And I will translate what he said, but in Spanish, and you will appreciate it, in Spanish it's even better. He said the following. He said, el que no vive para servir, no sirve para vivir.
Wow.
The translation is, those that are live but not for service, to serve others, are not worth. It is not worth living if you don't serve others in your life. It sounds better in Spanish, but bottom line here is
but it's powerful.
bottom line here is that the reason for us being here is service. It could be public service, like the senator is doing, has done all his life, like I had the privilege to do for a few years. But it could be service in many other ways. And we have an opportunity to serve others every day. I would close with this, because I know we want to have a dialogue. He talked, I would say, in a very inspiring way about what politics is all about yesterday.
Right.
And he actually, I would say, he framed it in that same phrase that he said in Havana, that the reason for being there is to serve others, the common good. And he actually, if you go over his message, and I actually encourage you to do so, his message to the Congress, he mentions the common good over and over and over again. And that's the reason for it. So sometimes it is important to look at what our personal responsibility is. And actually, I believe he admires that of our nation. But at the same time, he feels that we have a social responsibility as well. It's a dual responsibility. It's not only one or just the other, it's both.
Tim, I read last night that being there brought a tear to your eye.
Oh, more than one.
Uh,
I'm a complete sap. Yeah, completely.
why were you crying?
Well, great introduction, gave you a little of my background, but I worked with Jesuits in Latin America in a really challenging time, and I just want to say to my friend Luis, I'm really happy we're doing this together. I worked with Jesuits in 1980 and 81 in Honduras, military dictatorship. The situation in Honduras was quite similar to the situation in Argentina at the time. So without knowing the Pope, I kind of feel like I lived in a place where there was a military dictatorship. I lived in a place where the Jesuits were trying to do things for the people and getting cracked down on. The Jesuits at that time were unpopular with the church hierarchy in Rome and unpopular with the governments where they were. And, I knew people in Honduras one guy that I knew was killed by the Honduran military about 2 years after I left. A couple of people that I met while I was there, Jesuits, were killed at the University of Central America by Salvadoran death squads in 1989. A lot of the people I worked with, a couple of them were put in jail. It was just a very, very hard time. And, to be with him 35 years later called to mind my friends, a number of whom are buried in this hilltop cemetery in El Progreso, Honduras. I went to visit their graves on Ash Wednesday this past February. And so it just brought back, if at that time that I was there, when the guys I was working with were just getting banged on by their government and frankly kind of pushed by the hierarchy aside, if you had told me that there would be a Latin American Jesuit who'd be Pope of our church, would have been beyond my comprehension. So there were aspects of the message, certainly, that I found emotional and challenging. But I think a feeling of, the kind of a full circle, just over 35 years, seeing this person become Pope at this time and choosing the name Francis. So that's a huge pick when a Pope chooses his name. And he was saying two things when he chose his name. Francis of Xavier, the Jesuit, who evangelized in Asia. That's, I'm going to go out of my office. I'm not going to be an in-my-office Pope. I'm going to go out to the world. And Francis of Assisi, the great saint of peace and the glory of God's creation, I'm going to preach that message to the world. That's what he's done, in the 3 years. And so so many parts of my own, kind of limited experience kind of were stitching together during the course of that speech that it was very emotional. And maybe one other thing on your question, what did you hear that sort of was most affirming in your role as a public servant? The thing I liked many aspects of the speech. I loved using 4 American stories, certainly. He's never been to the United States before, but he was teaching us about us. Here are 4 great Americans. Let me tell you, I know something about you through the lives of these 4 great Americans. But this was really powerful. And this was something that I think made all of Congress bond together over the speech. We're in a world politically at very low expectations now. People hate Congress. People generally expect that it'll be division and inaction, that we won't get stuff done. Members of Congress, we contribute to this by tearing down our colleague or the other house or the other party. We contribute to a denigration of the entire enterprise and a lowering of expectations. But his speech was to set high expectations, and not only for us, but through us to the American public. By telling us these stories, let me tell you what I know about you. Let me tell you about these great heroes. Let me tell you what they did. They were just one person, but let me tell you what they did. And so I know that you as American leaders or Americans general, you can do these things. And so now here we have a world that has all these challenges. I'll put them on the table. But, I'm not coming here to be part of the low expectations parade. I'm coming here to remind you that you have done wonderful things and you can continue to do so. And so I thought that tone of the speech was so wonderful to cut against the kind of cloud of indifference, that often, or complacency that permeates the place. So that was the piece that I found most inspirational.
Well, as you mentioned, until 2 days ago, he had never set foot here. Washington thinks we're the center of the world. We're not the center of Pope Francis' world. Mm-hmm. But it was a very respectful speech. You mentioned the low expectations of the low ratings of Congress. Pope Francis' disapproval rating matches the Congress's approval rating. So my advice is, they ought to listen and learn and follow his example. In many ways, the most powerful thing he did was not what he said. He left Capitol Hill having talked to the most powerful legislative bodies on earth and went to have lunch with the homeless. So he left the most powerful to be with the least powerful. And frankly, he was probably more comfortable with the homeless guys.
Yeah.
How did, you talked about the affirmation, how did he challenge Washington? How did he challenge specifically your parties? Obviously, it was very affirming. He acknowledged the need to work together. But as you watched it, as I watched people, some clapped really hard, some less so, some be a little quiet. How do you think he's challenged politics, and in particular, your party?
Well, having been educated K through 12 by Marist Brothers and then coming here, some of what he said was not foreign. For example, I could imagine that one side of the aisle received very well the Republican side when he talked about respect for human life in all its forms. And some people may have thought he's only talking about abortion. But for us, Tim, that we were educated in the Catholic tradition, we know that life in the Catholic tradition is actually to be preserved from conception to natural death. And that includes the death penalty. So to some there, it may have been a surprise, but to us, it was not a surprise at all, and that's the way we Catholics think about this issue. So I would say, however, the greatest challenge, and it's a challenge that he has thrown back at the European leaders as well, with the migrant crisis that's actually overcoming many cities in Europe, is that we also have a responsibility in our hemisphere with our own migration issues and how to deal with it. And of course, we live in a different world, and we were talking earlier about how there are metal detectors everywhere, and so after 9/11, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there are issues and that we have to protect our nation, the homeland. But by the same token, these are people that are, in some cases, mostly in the European front. They are fleeing actually wars and persecution, and at sometimes it is religiously based. In this part of the world, there's some of that in Central America still, unfortunately, but there's also tremendous inequalities, and they're trying to provide for their children what we all would like to provide for our own. And actually, he said it in just so many words. And there should be some way to embrace them and bring them in. And I believe that was a direct challenge.
How about Tim for the Democrats?
Well, let me give you two. One that's, I think, particularly Democrat, but one that was really, I kind of almost took more personally, maybe because of my committee assignments and where I live. When the Pope talks about respect for life at all stages of development, I think that was the phrase, at all stages of development. We had a vote about whether we should defund Planned Parenthood yesterday. Now, whether that vote should have been scheduled on the day the Pope was there and should you be playing politics with the papal visit aside, this is obviously a huge issue. And it's a complex one. I mean, it's a challenging one. The issue of abortion, we're talking about human sexuality and our personal and our private lives. And the Pope also holds up as an example a woman, Dorothy Day, who had an abortion. Recently the Pope has been talking about, hey, we're a welcoming church and we're an open church. And, we may all do things that, are not our best selves here or there, but that doesn't close the door of the church to anybody. And he holds up as an example, one of the 4 Americans he talks about, a social justice pioneer who in the 1920s had an abortion. And that's a very well-known fact about Dorothy Day if you read about her. So that the challenge of how to grapple with the church's teachings on sexuality and reproductive rights and contraception and abortion, and to what degree are those doctrines that are about our personal behavior And to what degree are they doctrines about what laws we should pass even for people who are in different churches and have different traditions? I mean, these are tough, challenging issues, but you know, you make that statement, support for life in all its stages of development, and then following up, you know, and it was interesting. I did not stand for anything, and I tried not to applaud at all except at the start of the end, because I just, you know, I wouldn't do this in a sermon in my own church, so I just wasn't standing. But, you know, it was interesting, the statement about life and of all of its stages of development got one side of the room up on their feet really fast, and then when he followed it with the death penalty, the other side was up on their feet. So he was challenging us all. Yeah. I'll tell you one that really, I'm just going to really have to think about. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. Probably the toughest line, I think it was the toughest line he used in the speech he got into at the end, the notion of arms trade and sale of arms. And he basically said, sale of arms to those who will use it to hurt people. I mean, why do we do that? I mean, and he just said, we do it for money. Money that's drenched in the blood of the innocent. Wow. Yeah. Now, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and we're always grappling with requests by other nations that we sell arms to them so that they can protect themselves, so that Israel can defend itself against rockets, you know, hailing in from Gaza, or, you know, Ukraine needs weapons because they got a big bad Russia that's marching over their eastern real estate. So I'd like to think when I'm grappling with these issues that what I'm trying to do on the weapons side is helping countries or allies who have a legitimate need to defend themselves. But, you know, I've just been challenged by the Pope that I really got to look myself in the mirror. I mean, just to give you an example, right now we're dealing with a very complicated issue with Egypt, who's been a wonderful ally since the accord was reached between Egypt and Israel, and there's been peace there, and Egypt has been a good guarantor of peace with Israel. Egypt has a legitimate terrorist threat that they need to fight against, and so the Al-Sisi government wants us to give them more arms in Egypt. But Egypt is putting journalists in jail. Egypt is putting political opponents in jail. And so we've held arms back. Well, they do have a legitimate terrorist threat, and horrible things are happening. And they have been a good partner in the region, and they have been a good partner for Israel's security. So do we give them arms? And if so, what arms? But if they're using them against political opponents, I mean, are we giving them arms for money that's drenched in the blood of the innocent? I mean, this was a challenge that, you know, I didn't walk out of there like, okay, well, I know what I'm going to do now. I walked out of there like, wow, I really have to, every time I confront one of these issues, you know, I'm going to have to think about what the Pope said in a different way and think about what I'm doing in a different way. So I found that was a challenge that's like the life challenge. That's going to be kind of reverberating down the weeks and the months and the years.
John, can I ask him a question?
Yeah.
I'd love to ask him a question because, of course, after he left the Capitol building, you all stayed around.
Yeah.
I bet you were having conversations with your peers from both sides of the aisle, and I'm wondering if this will sink in, will it change some of what goes on in Congress, and in which ways?
I sure hope so.
Any reactions? I'm not telling us, you know, that you felt that people said, you know what, I ought to, as thoughtful as yours right now, that people saying, you know, I ought to think further about this issue.
I do think that there was, the discussions were less, boy, on this, we got a government shutdown next week, we got to do something different. I mean, he was calling us, he didn't talk about the government shutdown, but he was saying more common good and work together. So you heard a lot of questions like, wow, you know, I'm gonna have to think about that. Or what do you think about this thing about the arms trade? What do you think about the thing about the death penalty? We were kind of asking each other questions, and it was kind of opening dialogue. I mean, I'll tell you one thing, I mean, just immediately, Speaker Boehner today announced he's gonna retire at the end of October. That almost guarantees that the government will not shut down. That, you know, if you work it through, I mean, you understand why. He's not gonna be threatened by anybody who says, you do this and we'll take your speakership away. So, and he doesn't want government to shut down. The Speaker had been trying to get the Pope to come to Congress for 20 years. And once the Pope was there, I mean, he was like, okay, I've done this thing. I don't really have more to do. I can now say I'm stepping away. But in that one thing, I think, you know, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I think I'll be right. I think that pretty much assures that we're not going to go through this gut-wrenching shutdown that we went through 2 years ago. And we'll still have to find the big picture deal by year end, et cetera. But he reached a feeling of peace about his own time in public life and said, with the Pope here giving us this message, what better time to step away? So that, affected something that's pretty important. In a minor way, it affected something that's pretty important. And I hope that there will be other, certainly, I think the one you used, his challenging us on the migrant crisis. I wouldn't be surprised if you see that. That'll probably affect what the White House does. The White House will probably come to us and ask us and say, hey, we have a plan. We got to have a plan now. We haven't done right by this situation, but we've got to step up our game and have a plan. And I think you may see the White House do that, and you may see us respond in a different way than we would have before.
We're going to go to questions from the audience in a minute. There are 2 microphones. You need to use the microphone so we get it on tape. I was really struck by how your first answers were really personal, almost spiritual. And the second set of answers were moral. What's the right thing to do? This is the Institute for Politics. Mm-hmm. So, and we sort of started getting to it. Obviously, it had an impact on Speaker Boehner, as you said, capstone of his career. How do you think this affects the road forward for Congress? And how do you think it might affect the 2016 campaign? I was up in the gallery, and over here was Chris Christie, and down there was Marco Rubio, and over there was Bernie Sanders, and over here was Dr. Carson, and they're sitting there listening to this. And in some ways, he was not just talking to the Congress, he was talking to the whole country, both there and at Catholic Charities. So as if folks who want to get a question, line up. But what do you think? Politics is morality in some ways. What do you think the moral impact, what do you think the political impact is likely to be of this message for dialogue and cooperation and this bottom-up message? Think about every issue for how it affects the weak.
So, John, are you trying to suggest that we got rid of Donald Trump for good? We don't have to worry about him? I would say
the Pope's second miracle was knocking Donald Trump off the front pages, and Donald is not happy.
I would say as follows: when a person just such as the Pope, as this Pope, I was blessed, because I met the previous Pope, and he was very nice man. But this Pope touches everyone in a different way, I must admit that. I would say that he has the moral authority to call on everyone, from the president down, European leaders, to address issues that are truly everyday issues affecting real people. And when he called on everyone. When he was talking about immigration, he said, don't think of them as numbers. Think of them as people, real people. And if I may, I will challenge you all. Oftentimes, we walk down the street, and actually Washington has, in my opinion, the worst homeless situation that I've ever seen, not just in this city, but I just came back from Istanbul. You don't see that in Istanbul, much less, I was in Madrid. You don't see that. And we walk down the street. Do we look at those persons as people? Or I just they're there and you're going after your money? And how do we visualize them and treat them? I think he's challenging us to do this every day on everything we do. The person that, you go to the cafeteria, the person that serves you at the cafeteria, do you look at that person as a person, or just as, someone that's working, laboring there and that nothing else? How do we look at them? I think he's challenging us from, at every level, at every stage. And my opinion is that I tend to agree with Tim. I believe that on immigration, both parties are being challenged. I think if I may suggest, both are guilty of omission. uh, and something perhaps may happen. I know Speaker Boehner. I served with him. I stayed in touch with him. I believe the Pope's visit had a lot to do with this decision and with what he will do between now and the end of October to guarantee that there's not a shutdown. I would venture to agree with your thoughts. So the Pope is indeed immediately affecting what's happening here. And will it have a lasting effect? That's why we all go to confession. You know. But that's it.
Tim, Joe Biden was sitting,
Oh, yeah.
3 feet from the Pope. Bernie Sanders was sitting there. How do you think this affects the politics of 2016?
And I love the way Luis tackled it. On this European migrant situation, the Syrian migrants, both parties have committed sins of omission in this. I think the Dems have been reluctant to embrace the fact that we got to get more active in trying to stop the Syrian civil war and not just say, we're tired of doing stuff in the Middle East. And that may even involve having to use military assets to do a no-fly zone or a humanitarian zone in Syria instead of just letting millions and millions and millions keep flooding out. People would rather stay home if they could be safe. And the R's, some will raise, well, we can't take more refugees because they might be bad people or do bad things. I mean, both of us have had some, the log in our own eye that maybe has blocked us from seeing it correctly. And he challenged us. I think a political, not partisan political, but a part of the Pope's visit that I really like, his speech and his visit, is we're living in this great Hispanic moment in the United States. You had King Felipe here last week, and he was here timed because it's the 450th anniversary of the foundation of St. Augustine. Now, San Juan, Puerto Rico was significantly before in the 1520s, but in the 50 states of the United States, St. Augustine and Spanish and the Catholic faith and the Spanish roots of our nation, 42 years before Jamestown and the English, 55 years before Plymouth Rock and the English. And so we've been a Hispanic nation since the very first day of when Europeans came. And so, but we see a political dialogue that, is migration is kind of, you would get a stereotypical view of kind of immigration as if it's kind of a recent and dangerous phenomenon, not that the Hispanic roots of our nation go back to the very first day. You had a prominent political figure when George Jeb Bush answering a question in Spanish say, "Speak American." Well, what does it mean to speak American? I mean, to speak American, again, Spanish has been before English a language of this nation. And the Pope's visit as an American, and we all call ourselves American, right? I mean, he said, I'm a man of the Americas. We, North, South, or Central, we all call ourselves American. 35 nations, 1 billion people. There's only one ongoing war in our two continents, and there was just a breakthrough announcement the other day that the civil war in Colombia may be nearing a resolution, at least of the war. Winning the peace will take a lot longer, but at least the war could be over. We'll be two continents without war in the first time in recorded history in the Americas. That's a pretty powerful thing. So I think the Pope, as a man of the Americas, and coming and talking about immigration, and giving most of his speeches here in Spanish, not English, I think that there's a subtle underlining of this point that we have a connection, and that this Hispanic moment in our country and in our country's politics and in our 55 million Latinos and 50 million who speak Spanish in this country, I think it had a way of underlying that, not just for political purposes, but for all purposes.
It probably escaped notice that the most specific thing that Pope Francis said in Cuba was the conflict between the guerrillas and the government needed to end. And I would not be surprised that
to see that happen.
We have a bunch of people. How about this as a way to proceed? Let's do 2 questions at once and then ask our panelists to respond to both or either.
Great.
So let's start over here. Identify yourself and ask your question.
Hi there, my name is Dylan Hughes. I'm a linguistics major in the college. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you all for coming out and offering such deeply thoughtful remarks. So obviously the Pope, in his message of compassion over politics, has given us all a lot to think about, as evidenced by any layperson or even John Boehner's reaction. But how do you feel about some of these Congress people who opted to boycott the Pope's speech and willingly ignore it? Do you feel like they're missing the message somewhat?
Okay, over here.
Hi, I'm Mariel. I'm a senior in the college undergrad. Thank you so much for coming. I guess I kind of wanted to speak as a follow-up to the question about how it might change Washington politics, the Pope's visit. Obviously, one of his most famous issues that he's advocated about has been the environment since his last encyclical. So I'm curious to see your opinion, not just what was the reaction to that, but might his reframing of the environment and taking care of the environment as a moral issue change the discourse in Washington? Because it's been so hugely political and a question of whether or not you believe in global warming. Do you think that casting it as a moral issue to take care of our surroundings and to kind of will that help depoliticize the issue a little bit? Will that help a bridge divide? Am I being too optimistic in that? But yeah, like you said about it might change the migrant crisis discourse. I was wondering how you think that reframing that issue might change discourse on the environment.
Actually, these two
Yeah.
are connected because the guy who boycotted
over
did
that
so
issue.
on the environmental issue. I find it really interesting that when the Pope finally came to Washington, the person who boycotted was not a fundamentalist Baptist preacher, but a Catholic dentist who was mad at him on environment. So will it change the dialogue around care for creation? And what do you think of the people who push back?
It was a speech not to miss. I don't have an opinion about those who came or didn't. I think that they'll probably regret that they weren't there, just because it was, we're just not going to, in a life of 70 years, you will live 25,000 days. So the number of days where you wake up in the morning and I will remember this day for the rest of my life, very small. Now, there will be days you'll remember for the rest of your life because an accident happened or but the number of days where when you wake up, I will remember this day for the rest of my life, very small. Yesterday was one of those days. So, I feel badly for anybody who could have had the experience and didn't. And I hope it will open up. I hope it will restore the climate issue to a bipartisan one. The first bill that was introduced on climate change was the Joe Lieberman, John Warner bill in the Senate in 2005 or 6, and it was very bipartisan. And it's gotten pushed for a variety of reasons into a partisan direction, but there isn't any reason it needs to be. And in a way, the more we're dealing with challenges in the present day. I see in Hampton Roads, Virginia, 1.6 million people, second most vulnerable area to sea level rise in the United States. I see now it's a completely nonpartisan issue. They may not want to spend time debating the science, but they do want to debate the fix. They definitely want to debate the fix. And so I hope he might restore it to where it was. And I will echo what Luis said. If you look at the Pope's speech yesterday, almost all the issues he talked about cut across national boundaries too. Climate is not an issue that only the U.S. can solve. The migrant issue is not an issue that only the U.S. can solve. The inequalities in wealth and poverty is not an issue that only the U.S. can solve. But who can speak to the leaders of a lot of nations at once? This Pope can, and there's not many others who can. So his message was to us and to our citizens, but he picked big themes that really cut across national boundaries too.
Yeah, I will echo what Tim said, especially on global, the global climate situation. There are so many things that can be done that are bipartisan. There are others where their parties may not agree, but my hope will be that the parties will decide, you know what, we agree on 70%. Let's do the 70%, which is better than nothing, and take it from there. And that's my hope.
Yeah.
Even change the language. Having a debate about caring for God's creation is different than which cap and trade policy might work. So let's do one here and one here.
Okay, my name is Sarek. I'm a freshman in the college here, and I was just kind of wondering, do you think the issues that the Pope speaks on maybe aren't so political as we would like them to be? Like maybe in America we just make them political for the sake of them being political. Maybe these are actually moral issues. These are things that we have an obligation to do as citizens and to our fellow citizens to help them out. Do you think these are things that maybe we should stop making so political, and maybe we should move them towards what we should do morally and what is morally right?
Great question.
Hi, William in the college from Virginia. The Pope challenged everyone to work together better, and I'm wondering, as leaders, how do you plan, or how do you think that you can further reconciliation and collaboration across political divides?
Do you want to start, Luis? You want me to?
Let's start with
Okay,
Luis.
sure. I've heard his homilies. I saw most of his speech live, then I watched it, the rest at the Congress. I read them over. I don't find them to be political in nature. I think we are political. And as everything in life, the prism we use at looking at things make them political. One of my colleagues, I'm a lawyer, I'm a corporate lawyer. One litigator further down the hall came over and said, "Gosh, he was so political today." And I looked at him and I said, "I don't think so." I just that how we go about these moral issues may become a political issue, and that's what what we all have to figure out. But I don't think his message was political.
There's so many of the issues you talked about. I do think there's some common ground among the American people, but the political process or the media or whatever, the combination makes it polarized on abortion. The overwhelming position of the American people, if you kind of poll, should abortion be illegal under all circumstances? Should there be no restrictions on abortion? Or should there be reasonable restrictions? And you can kind of define reasonable how you want. Most people are in that middle position. They're not absolutist one way. They're not absolutist. They're in a middle position. You poll on issues of wealth and poverty and the tax rate and things like that. Again, you'll find people there. You poll on issues dealing with immigration reform. There's a reason that the immigration reform bill that passed through the Senate passed with 70 votes, Democrats and Republicans. It was because we listened to our constituents, and there is a common ground there. But now to go to your point, sometimes the mechanisms and processes we use don't necessarily kind of respect that and allow that to be what drives it. I mean, 40% of Americans are independents. Only 30% are Democrat, 30% are Republican. We make it very hard for independents to get elected. So an interesting thing is the largest group of Americans in terms of their political orientation, it's really hard to get on balance and be elected as an independent these days. So we do things, gerrymandering does it, and others that kind of polarize the political positions. So what we have to do, and Luis is an expert at this and has been, and I try hard too. I was a governor in Virginia, Democrat. I had 2 Republican houses. So I'm really used to working across the aisle. My political hero is my father-in-law. He was a Republican governor of Virginia. Everything I do in the body in the Senate, I'm always looking, if I'm going to introduce a bill, can I find a Republican co-sponsor? I'm the Democratic co-chair of the Wednesday morning prayer breakfast in the Senate that's been going since the 1950s, and it's Democrat and Republican, and we alternate speakers every week, Democrat and Republican. So I try to spend my time in ways that build bridges, and I will say, I have the fortune to be able to do that because I live so close to D.C. My colleagues who have to get on planes and fly to Omaha and then drive 300 miles to her ranch, I'm thinking of my friend Deb Fisher in Nebraska. It's harder for many to spend that time to build the bridges that we need to build. To find the 70% where we can work on together, we have to listen to each other enough to know where the 70% is. And sadly, we don't have people really on either side who spend the time necessary to listen and find those points of overlap. But we can do that, and when we do find, we do find common ground.
We're approaching the end of our time, so what I'd like to do is ask everybody in line if you can give us the short version of your question, and we'll collect all those and ask our the governor and the senator to respond. So.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a freshman in the college, and I'm from Oakland, California, a neighborhood where, in my neighborhood, guns often fall into the wrong hands, and there are too many arbitrary killings. As you mentioned, Pope Francis talked about the immorality of selling weapons that serve the sole purpose to kill. How do you think this applies domestically to gun control? And do you think that Pope Francis hit a chord with those that are, maybe against background checks or gun laws?
Okay, Gun.
Hi, my name is KJ Moran, and I'm a sophomore in the college. My question is about female ordination. Senator Kane, you recently came out in favor of it. And I was just hoping for both of you to speak on your ideas involving female ordination and how that affects women in both the public and the private, personal, religious sphere.
Okay. Good luck with that.
Hi, my name is Richie Mulaney. I'm a sophomore in the college. I have a two-part question, mostly directed at Governor Fortunio, but I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Senator, if you want to chime in. A recent Gallup poll found that only 45% of American conservatives have a favorable rating of this pope, as opposed to 68% of self-identified liberals in America. As a Catholic Republican myself, I find this very troubling. My first question is, how do you get Republicans to rally behind the universal themes of Pope Francis? And my second question is, without changing any church doctrine, I see Pope Francis as changing the perception of the church from wedge issues to universal themes and social justice. How can you emulate that in the Republican Party to have that Francis effect for the GOP? Thank you.
Okay.
Good question.
Anybody else over there? Okay, last one. All right.
Oh, here we go. One.
Okay.
One more, yes.
Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm a first-year MPP grad student with McCourt, and probably the only Jew in this room. But I was raised Catholic, and I have a lot of respect for this Pope. I was wondering if, when the climate encyclical came out, there was a large contingent of Congress people who were, whose response to this was, well, some liberals must have gotten to him. And from when I was raised Catholic, I was led to understand that the Pope was the link to God, and that the Pope couldn't really be wrong or be swayed in that way. So do you find that in Washington, faith has become politicized rather than politics affecting faith? Do you think that people's faith has become politicized?
Well, a lot to work with.
And one more.
One more?
Oh, no, I think we got.
Papal infallibility, women's ordination, gun control. How do we lift up these issues in a way that it gathers everybody? Just one. There are several polls on the Pope. The one that was referred to is frankly an outlier. There have been 2 done in the last week. And among Catholics, conservative Catholics who go to church every week, the Pope's disapproval rating is 6%. So there may be among the elites a lot of pushback. Is he a liberal? Is he, what is this? I think among the folks, he's doing just fine. So, but you're interested in what these guys have to offer, not me.
Just maybe I'll just tackle real quick infallibility, guns, and ordination. And I really want to get on the ordination one. Infallibility. So I think we all know that doctrine, which is highly controversial both inside but especially outside the church, is rarely invoked. So most often when the Pope offers thought about issues, it's not under the cloak of infallibility. It's just, here's my reasoned and prayerful reflection. So, you know, he's not trying, and the church has a great tradition, especially the Jesuits, of being really argumentative. So he's not trying to foreclose debate by saying with Laudato Si, you know, here's what I'm saying about climate change. He's trying to inspire debate. So you can joust about it and argue with it, but, you know, he's mounted a pretty good argument that you at least should have to grapple with. On the guns issue, you know, I think, I have a feeling, I live in a state, I mean, now I'm really going to get emotional. I mean, I had to live through the shooting at Virginia Tech and go spend time with 32 families who had lost their loved ones and so many others who had been injured, and I'm still in touch with them, you know, 8 years later, so many of them, and I've watched the ripple effect of these consequences in their lives. And then we just had this horrible shooting on air of these Virginia reporters, you know, killed by this mentally disturbed guy who they worked with right on TV. And so, you know, we are really scarred, man. We got a lot of scar tissue in Virginia around this issue, and the NRA is headquartered in Virginia, too. So, you know, what do you do with all of that? I mean, I have, since I was a mayor in a city that had one of the highest homicide rates in the United States when I first got into office, I've always felt like I'm a gun owner. I believe in the Second Amendment, just like I believe in the First Amendment. But the First Amendment, freedom of speech, doesn't mean you can libel somebody, doesn't mean you can slander them. There's rules. You know, we're not just individuals. We're living in a society. There's got to be rules. And so I feel like there need to be rules. And with respect to guns, background checks being a simple one, because we already have rules, 9 categories of people shouldn't have weapons. But the only way to know whether they are prohibited persons or not is if you have some either responsibility on the seller to check it out, or you have a background check system that works. So that would be one area where I don't think his message yesterday is going to change the political equation at all. Sadly, the political equation, and that only changes because an accumulated weight of tragedies finally pierces the, conscience, the collective conscience of leaders. And for me, that point of piercing my conscience came, when I was a mayor. We're not yet there, but we can do things that will make life better without intruding upon people's constitutional rights. We can. On ordination, look, when you're Catholic, say this about anything, ordination, abortion, contraception, any issue, I feel like you accept the teachings of the church. You may disagree with them. You may argue about them. You may pray that they change, but you kind of, I think you kind of have to live by them. But I have always really believed that as long as women are not accorded an equal place in the spiritual plane of Catholicism and other great world religions, that will always be a justification for differential treatment in the earthly plane. And if you really grapple, in my view, and I'm no biblical scholar, I've never taken divinity courses, but if you grapple with the message of Jesus Christ in the New Testament, his interaction with the woman at the well in the Gospel of John, all his disciples, don't talk to her. She's a Samaritan, don't talk to her. She hasn't had the most, the greatest history in terms of her own fidelity in her life. But Jesus says, yeah, I'm going to teach you guys something. No, I am going to talk to her, and she's going to be the first evangelist for me. The disciples are hanging with him, but she is the first who then goes out and preaches Jesus' message when he tells her all these facts about her life. He knows her, but then they have this wonderful dialogue. And so, or you read the Galatians message. I was asked by a news account like 2 months ago, what do you hope that you hear from the Pope? Now, I knew that this would not be in the speech to Congress because this is doctrinal, not a congressional thing. But I just said, we need to hear his lesson on humility and service. But what I hope to hear is some opening on this issue, because for me, the great Galatians, message, which seems to me to encapsulate everything. In Christ there is no Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female. All are one in Jesus Christ. That just epitomizes the whole thing. And so I've always prayed that my church would one day, have women's ordination. The church I go to for many years, our pastor was a woman. Because we were so tiny, we didn't get a priest. And so Sister Cora Billings, a Sister of Mercy, was our pastor, and that was kind of cool. We're not there yet, but, this Pope the Spirit is moving in this man and in the church and in the society as a whole, and I'm holding out hope that it will continue. I know it's not going to stop moving. Whether it will move in this direction, I don't know, but I'm hoping that it will.
Louis?
Yeah, I'd love to tackle that one as well, if I may. As a former executive in government, I can tell you that my experience with women was much better and more fulfilling than with men. Mm-hmm. Really, number one. Number two, in terms of getting things done, being organized, they tended to do better than men. And I was always amazed by the strength. And when I say it's the strength of their character. So I would say that there's a reason why God wanted only women to have children. They're children and not men. And I guess that's one of the reasons for it. I believe there's going to be a movement in that direction. But in the church, things, it's not in our time. It's in his time. And we have to understand that. That should not in any way affect our faith. There's a tremendous contrast between the previous Pope and this Pope. The previous Pope came to America. Actually, I was in Congress at the time. And there were some issues with some orders, nuns' orders, and he actually was ordering investigations into what they were doing and what have you. This Pope is saluting the nuns' orders. He visited one yesterday, so he is going out of his way. I've noticed also in the masses that, I'm sure this is not by sheer accident, that there are more women than men in the readings and in participating in different ways. So I notice movement. I know it's going to take time, and when I was your age, I could not wait for things to happen. But things eventually happen, and I believe that it's something that will happen. In terms of the polling and conservatives, and I'm a conservative, and I can tell you that I've seen different poll numbers, so I would not be swayed by that. However, I can tell you that some press outlets have this intent in making this political. I was reading the Wall Street Journal this morning. I read it every morning. And I could not believe one of the articles, and it ignored half of what the Pope said yesterday and just focused on what seemed to lean Democratic. And I said, you know what, obviously this person doesn't get it or has an agenda. But we have to understand that there's a responsibility for the members of the press, and not everyone carries that responsibility in the same way.
On infallibility, I was really struck by the Jesuit magazine interview, America. I'm a correspondent. You all ought to read America. I want that on the tape. The Pope was asked, who is Jorge Bergoglio? And the interviewer said, he stopped, he thought, and he said, I am a sinner. He's the only infallible person on earth who began by saying, I'm a sinner. On women, in the Philippines, there were 4 young people who were to ask him questions. The Pope had a great speech, put it aside and said, let's talk. So 4 young people asked him questions, 3 guys, 1 woman. And the woman talked about evil in the world and the typhoon and cried. And the Pope said 2 things. One, he said, next time, more women. More women. And he said, second thing, I want to talk to the guys. And it was your point. He says, her tears taught us more than any words could. He said, you need to see the world through your tears. So I don't put anything beyond this Pope. If you're interested about the role of women in the church, on October 22nd, the initiative that I'm a part of is hosting the head of Catholic Healthcare, Sister Carol Kean, the head of Catholic Charities, Sister Donna Markham, and the head of Catholic Relief Services, Carolyn Wu. 3 of the most important ministries of the church, all headed by women, and it'll be a very interesting discussion. If you have not had your fill of discussion of the Pope and the Pope's visit, on Monday evening at 6 o'clock in Gaston Hall, we are having Cokie Roberts, Mark Shields, Michael Steele, Alexia Kelly, and Kim Daniels assessing the Pope's trip and its impact. And please join us. If you want to RSVP, you can go to Catholic Social Thought. I thought we were moving really fast when we had something on Monday, and then Mo called and said, we're going to get these 2 remarkable gentlemen here on Friday morning. So the last word from me is a friend of mine said yesterday, you have a Pope who knows how to Pope. And we have 2 leaders who know how to lead. Please join me in thanking our respondents.
Pleasure seeing you again together.
Again, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. Again, I want to close with just one short story about each one that I'm not sure they know I'm going to tell. Luis, despite being a very strong Republican, I very recently learned in 2008, as a Republican member of the House from Puerto Rico, got involved in the Democratic presidential primary in Puerto Rico, not because he wanted to muck it up, but because he wanted to ensure that the most statehood candidate, made it onto the ballot in both parties because that was what's best for his people, for the people in his perception. And so he put the partisanship aside and advocated for a candidate in the Democratic primary who he thought would be a good advocate for statehood. Tim Kaine, as governor, not only is the first Catholic governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I like to point out was also the first Catholic governor, or the first wedding he officiated was between this guy in Virginia who was raised Muslim marrying a woman who was raised Orthodox Jew. And we're still going strong. Yeah. Thank you. And I say this because these are two people who exemplify everything that we're talking about here. Two people who are all about bringing people together, both in words and in action. So thank you. Thank you, John, for masterfully moderating the conversation. Politics.georgetown.edu. Check us out at GU Politics. Thanks.